Now, in a great deal of the modified Pilates program, the title of the exercise refers to the final level that you get to, but that's going to be preceded by many individual kind of breakdown levels of all the constituent parts which get you to that point. And that's not only to kind of instill confidence and help technique, but it's just to make sure that you're following this principle of optimal loading and that you're not jumping into the final level without the knowledge that constituent parts are what they need to be. So the double leg stretch is a really good example of that. It's quite a dynamic exercise. It's quite a difficult exercise at its final form, but fundamentally it's made up of simple constituent parts, but you've got to make sure that those ones are performed well and that you're making the appropriate progressions in order to get the most out of that final level and not risk making anything counterproductive. So I'll go through all of the levels of the double leg stretch from start to finish, and hopefully you can then not only find a level which suits you best, but if you do make it through to that last version, you'll know that you've got the confidence that everything's working as it should, so you're performing that exercise really well. So that final level of the double leg stretch, it is challenging, it is dynamic, the speed can be varied to suit. It's a good abdominal strengthener. It's one way you need pretty good level of overall conditioning to perform to the proper level. So, as I was just alluding to, you need to make sure that every component part is really good to make sure that that exercise is being performed well and indeed safely. You don't want to risk straining things and then having the wheels come off at a later stage. So all of the levels of the double leg stretch are performed from your rest position. So needless to say, when you're going down into the rest position, you've got to make sure that you're neutrally aligned through your lumbar-pelvic girdle and that you maintain that throughout. So the first level, we want to make sure that the arm movement is really on point. It's a very simple movement. We bring the arms up as if we're holding a beach ball over our low stomach, and then we breathe in as we take the arms overhead, and then breathe out as they semicircle back to the start. So of course, very, very simple, but a few things to bear in mind. Symmetry and smoothness of movement. As you're doing your arm movements, they should be mirroring each other as best as you can, and your hands should stay very much in your visual field. You don't want to be taking the arms down and sweeping across the floor. It's not very conducive with a happy shoulder, so you're just keeping these arms right where you can see them and getting this semicircular orbit of the hands. The next thing to bear in mind is that sometimes if you take the arms too far, or if you're quite stiff in your upper body, you might get what's called a rib flare, where the ribs barrel up. It's normally accompanied with an overarching of the lumbar spine as well. It tends to affect some people more than others, but you just want to make sure that's not happening. So you can visualize just tightening some imaginary springs between your rib line and your belt line, so that as you go up, you're just getting that little bit of extra increased awareness through that abdominal wall. Now, if you're keeping your hands where you can see them in your visual field, that's unlikely to happen, but some people will be quite predisposed to that rib flare, and that's what you've just got to make sure is not happening. So there's the basic construct for the arm movements. We then combine that with various leg movements, starting off with the simple one leg stretch edition. So from the beach ball holding position, as you inhale, you slide one leg down the mat and make sure that your arms and leg arrive at their final destination at the same time and that they arrive back at the start at the same time. You then simply alternate the legs, breathing in as you take the legs and leg and arms away from each other, and then breathing out as you come back. Now, as you're breathing out, you can think about sucking that thigh up into the hip socket, about trying to bring everything to meet itself so that there's that journey away, and then the journey back in is getting that kind of vacuum feeling where you're trying to get this abdominal canister functioning better. Of course, make sure that your neutral spine is maintained both when you're moving away and towards, but also when you switch legs, and that there's no rocking of the pelvis side to side. Moving on to the next level, we move into an open chain pattern for the legs. So we bring one leg up to tabletop, same start, inhale away, exhale back. To begin with, don't lower the leg too much. Probably have the knees ending up at the same height as one another so that you're not dropping that leg substantially. If you feel that this movement is all right, then you can begin to take the leg to a lower point. Bear in mind though that the lower you go down, of course, the more loading there is through the front wall of the hip and through the abdomen. And sometimes people will get clicking and clunking happening. Multiple reasons for that, but normally it can be rectified by just not kicking too low. If you do get that clunk each time, try not to repeat that, because it's just a sign that your body is not particularly happy with how things are moving. There might be any number of solutions to that, but in this simple demonstration, just make sure that you're not kicking too low if you experience that clunking. Now we need to begin to up the ante a little bit, so we're going to come up to double tabletop for the next version. Of course, double tabletops should be signified by beautiful control through that midsection. You can bring your feet and knees together if that's more comfortable for you. And then the legs stay static. Inhale, arms overhead, exhale back. Now here we're just dealing with the fact that we've got both legs off the floor and we're basically just saying to our body, have you got what it takes to be happy with the weight of both legs up before thinking about moving on to another level. As you're performing these movements, think back to that control necessary to get the arms moving symmetrically and make sure that there's no feeling of undue strain through either the back or the hip flexors when you're spending a bit of time at double tabletop. So once you've got very happy that you can get that level done to a reasonable degree, we can move on to a more dynamic movement. For this one, we will have the legs at hip width apart, and it's a continuation of what we did on the mat. We inhale as one leg goes away, exhale to come back, and then we switch to the other leg. So as you're performing these leg stretch movements, again, don't drop the leg height too much to begin with, because you're keeping everything kind of quite close to center here to make sure that you're not overloading things. Gradually, you can start lowering the foot to a lower height, and that will increase the effort through that front line of the body. One thing you want to try and make sure of here is that you're keeping the other leg still, and that will kind of give you a reference point. You're keeping your pelvis still as well. If you send the leg away and it overcomes the core mechanisms which keep the pelvis stable, the pelvis will rotate and then you'll see the other leg move as well. So by keeping this leg still, it kind of gives you a nice window into whether you're actually keeping everything else still as well. And that includes keeping the stomach flat without any bulging or popping up. So there's the continuation. This is so far still just a single leg stretch movement. Of course, the name of the exercise is the double leg stretch, which is where we can start modifying things even further. For double leg stretch movements, get the legs together, feet and knees together. If you need to, you can pop a small pillow between or a cushion between your knees. From your beach ball hold start position, small leg movement to begin with. Remember, we've got both legs we have to contend with here. Neutrally aligned, of course. Inhale away. Exhale back. And you can see I'm not reaching my legs very far to start with. I'm just doing a little straightening. And don't worry if they don't quite straighten. Any distance you move your legs away from your center will significantly increase the work being done. So less is more sometimes. And here you're just moving away in small margins, and then gradually you can see whether you want to take those legs to a greater distance. And you'll feel very quickly how every extra degree you move away from center increases the work through that front chain of the body. When you're happy that you've got enough control there and there's not excessive fatigue and you've built up that control necessary, we can then add in an abdominal prep. So from your start position, draw that belt line and rib cage. Well, keep the belt line still, but draw the rib cage towards the belt line into your abdominal prep. That activates those abdominal muscles further. Make sure you're not flattening the back. The beach ball, and then we can move away. And the same as before, inhale away, exhale back. We want to make sure that the control is exquisite here. Otherwise, you're going to be sacrificing some of that control and risk straining that lumbar spine and that hip region, which we don't want. The final element here is to add in a dynamic element of our abdominal prep. So this time, as you take the hands overhead, you lower down from your crunch position and then come back up. Inhale, exhale. Draw the rib cage towards the belt line and visualize that abdominal shortening happening without the lumbar spine flattening. Okay, so that's the challenge with this final level. The legs can come down to a lower height if you feel you want to. And then the final progression, if you felt that you need one, which is only for those who are quite confident and quite conditioned, is speed. So you could end up doing this at almost like a double cadence. And as you're doing that, you're really going to feel the effort ramp up quite a lot. So there we have all of the levels, which I would teach at this modified double leg stretch. Starting off from the very simple, ranging to pretty good workout. You get your heart rate up and breath rate up quite quickly if you're adding in that speed component for the final level. As I've said at the beginning of the video, make sure that you're going through in stages so that you have this concept of optimal loading well understood. And you don't want to run before you can walk. And if you find that you're struggling with one level all of a sudden, go back to the last level you felt comfortable at, practice there consistently, put in the time on that level, and then you'll find that the next level will be attainable sooner than you think.